Be warned, this story may shock you, disturb you, frighten you, horrify you, give you nightmares, or all of the above. This was a very scary experience for me, and it all happened on a cold, snowy night. I was planning to cook something hot for dinner that night, it being unnaturally cold for a late October evening. I had a small fallout with my mother-in-law a few hours prior, and my husband had just come home. I went to the front door to greet him, but I discovered his face donned an expression of fury, and no sooner had he seen me that he started accusing me of being disobedient to my mother-in-law, despite the fact that I was, quote, the obedient wife. I told him that I had had my own reasons for arguing with Mrs. Amber, but he wouldn't listen to me. For whatever reason that prevailed above all else, he grabbed me by my arm, dragged me to the back of the apartment, opened the large window to the balcony, and shoved me outside. "Please, open the door. Please forgive me. I'm freezing." My limbs gradually lost all sensation, and I began to feel faint. My name is Alice, and I'm a 28-year-old office worker. I lived with my husband, Talon, who is 12 years older than me. My husband and I sometimes have differences of opinion, probably because he is so much older than me. But we have always been able to talk things out and understand each other. For the 3 years that we'd been married, we didn't have some very big problems, but one could say we were one of those couples who fought a lot more compared to most others. But the event I'm about to tell you about marked the end of our relationship, and allowed me to discover something completely unexpected about myself. One day, my husband suddenly proposed that my mother-in-law, Mrs. Amber, move in with us.
My mother will be moving in to live with us tomorrow.
Wait. You've got to be kidding, right?
I'm serious. Get the house ready for tomorrow, okay?
Prepare for... Wait, what? Tomorrow? You're moving too fast. Slow down and use simple words so that I can understand you.
Oh, just shut up and do as I tell you, woman.
My husband is not usually a domineering man. In fact, he's quite the opposite. One of the traits that made me fall in love with him was his willingness to compromise on lots of things. My curse is that I'm pretty picky about lots of things, and I doubted I would find anyone to marry because of this trait of mine. But nope, Talon proved me wrong big time. He was quite literally the man of my dreams, and that caused me to confess my feelings for him. But this time, he was really trying to get me to obey him. I'm personally not a very strong person, but I'm very outspoken when it comes to crookedness or unreasonableness. Hey, that's not the way to ask someone to do something, is it? If you were asked to do the same thing by me, in exactly the same manner, telling you to just shut up and do as I tell you, would you say yes? My husband stammered in response.
Okay, you got me. So the real reason why she's moving in is because...
According to Talon, the reason for Mrs. Amber moving in together with us is because the family home where she lived was pretty dilapidated and needed to be renovated. My mother-in-law had lost her husband a few years ago. Such a kind man, Mr. Amber, rest his soul, and was living alone, and she was afraid of getting in an accident in her house that was falling apart. When I heard my husband's explanation, I understood the reason for moving in together. So she's moving in with us until the work on her house is completed, right?
Yes, that's right.
So if you've known about this for a long time, I think it's only fair to discuss it in advance.
Well, I mean, I'm too busy to tell you that.
It's not like I have all the time in the world either, Talon. I'm a working woman, per your request, I may add, and my time at home to do the housework is very limited. You can't expect me to just show up at your service the day before and expect me to do all the prep work around the house.
All right, I get it. You want me to help you. Is that it? All right, fine. I'll help you. Happy now?
Of course you have to help me. I wondered why my husband was so overbearing from the beginning, when I would have understood if he had just explained the reason for Mrs. Amber moving in with us from the beginning. But this cohabitation was what enabled me to ultimately discover a side of my husband I did not want to meet. When I came home from work the next day, my mother-in-law was there. "Oh, Mrs. Amber, welcome. I do hope you make yourself at home for the short time you'll be staying with us." "Alice, honey, where the hell have you been?" I was puzzled by my mother-in-law, who glared at me without saying any greeting words as soon as I came home. Where have I been? Why, I was at work, of course. Is something the matter? Then, my mother-in-law sighed deliberately. "What were you thinking? Never even offering to pick up the master's mother to take her home?" "I'm sorry about that. I wanted to greet you properly too, but Talon only told me about you moving in to live with us last night, and I can't take a day off work so suddenly." So Talon was right. You really are a terrible wife. I felt anger inside at my mother-in-law's condescending attitude, but since we were only going to live together for a limited time, I told myself to put up with it. The truth is, my mother-in-law and I have always been at each other's throats. The reason for this is that I can't help but rebel against my mother-in-law's idea of what a wife should be. Her views on a perfect wife were so old-fashioned, and they never married well with my current lifestyle. The biggest difference was that she could devote all of her time to the house and family, and I had a job that demanded a lot of time, energy, and focus. However, I thought it was a good thing to keep a proper distance from her, as everyone has their own way of thinking. But when my mother-in-law said the words, "Talon was right," it stuck in my mind in the worst way possible. Thus began my life with my mother-in-law, a life with nothing but a sense of upheaval. The next morning, as I was leaving for work, my mother-in-law stopped me and said, "Alice, where is my breakfast?" "Your breakfast? Oh, well, I'm sorry, it's time for me to go to work. I must be off, Mrs. Amber." I was surprised, because I had never expected to be asked to take care of my mother-in-law's meals, so I left the house as if I was running away. At work, I received numerous phone calls from that abhorrent woman, and I wasn't looking forward to picking it up at all. When I finally picked up the phone during my break, she exclaimed in a voice full of irritated excitement, "Okay, Alice, I've had enough of your bullshit. Where the hell are you? You don't even cook breakfast for your family? Get your ass back here, and do your damn job as your husband's wife." "I'm sorry, breakfast, Mrs. Amber? First of all, it's past noon. Second of all, didn't you used to always make everyone's breakfast back at your place? I assumed you were going to do the same as always." "The hell do you mean by work? Talon toasted his own bread and made his own coffee this morning. You should be ashamed of yourself." I got dizzy just listening to my mother-in-law's voice during the phone call. The toaster bakes the bread, and I just turned on the coffee machine. What the hell did this harpy want me to do? This was the first time I was living with my mother-in-law, and although I told myself this was only temporary, at this pace, I was completely convinced I was going to go batshit insane. I didn't even want to go home anymore. I even thought of living in a hotel while my mother-in-law was living at home. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Amber. In any case, I'm at work right now, so let's talk about it when I get home, okay?" is what I said before hanging up the phone. Before I left for home after my work was finished for the day, I told my husband, who worked in another department, about this morning's phone call with my mother-in-law. "Your mother is interfering with everything, Talon. Her bickering and her lecturing are so intense that I don't think I could stay at home with her. That's not how she should treat those who are kind enough to offer her free accommodations until her house is all done."
Listen, I think that's a little too far. Mom is like a savant when it comes to housework, and she can't stand it when you cut corners on the housework, is all.
"Talon, I want you to be honest with me when I ask you this question. Did you think I was slacking off on the housework?"
Well, yeah, but you're working, so I have to put up with it and not hold you too responsible for doing a lousy job at home. You also have to keep your end of the bargain and put up with her a little too.
I suppose that's true. I just got a little frustrated, and I'm the one who got on your nerves. I'm sorry, Talon, for putting you in between me and your mother. I'm sorry. I decided to buy some nice meat that I thought my mother-in-law would like and make Japanese sukiyaki for dinner that night. When I got home, I prepared dinner while patiently enjoying listening to my mother-in-law's bickering and complaining. I don't mean to nag you, honey, but when I think of Talon, I just can't stand by and say nothing. Oh, this meat looks delicious.
Mom, Alice is still inexperienced, so be sure to teach her slowly, okay?
I know I'm not very good at some things, but I'll do my best, Mrs. Amber. I'm too old and my legs and back are not strong enough to do the housework unless you do it right. I'll teach you everything I know.
Alice, you hear that? This is awesome news. You should be thankful to her.
Huh. Thank you, Mrs. Amber. I felt uncomfortable with my husband's arrogant attitude in front of my mother-in-law, but I decided to accept it in order to make the most of the time we spent living together. From then on, I was tired and stressed out every morning and evening by my mother-in-law's criticism and abuse of me over the housework. I've been holding out until my parents' house is renovated, but they haven't given me a definite date for when it will be finished. I decided to ask my husband about how the renovations were going. Hey, so when are they going to finish the renovations? You never told me the definite date it was going to be finished.
Wait, I didn't?
No, you didn't.
Oh shit, my bad. So actually it's costing us more than expected, so the construction is on hold right now.
What do you mean? I didn't expect the worst to happen, and I was so initially so upset. But then I remembered what he had said about putting up with Mrs. Amber to some extent, so I forced myself to calm down and asked my husband how much it would cost. His answer was that it would cost around $2,000 extra. All right, so I could cover that easily with my savings. So I offered to pay the extra money, on the condition that the renovations got back on track, and fast. My mother-in-law was delighted that I had paid for the extra funds, and her mood improved. She also stopped pestering me about my housework. I was able to breathe a little better now that my mother-in-law was no longer harassing me, even if only temporarily. But, as time went by, my mother-in-law's attitude gradually worsened again. To make matters worse, Talon was always on my mother-in-law's side, and even after I came home from work tired, I would get even more stressed at home because she was always making me work hard. I told myself that I would be patient until her house was renovated. Unfortunately, the renovations continued to cost more than expected, and I kept on offering more money. Yes, I admit it. I was desperate to get her to leave us, but you can't blame me after what I'm telling you right now. Anyone who would be prepared to endure this sort of mental and financial abuse is simply nothing less than a being that knows infinity and beyond. But I am only human, and a pretty picky one at that, and the burden of maybe living together with Mrs. Amber with no end in sight, along with the additional expenses, was taking its toll on me. How much longer did I have to endure? I was just getting so damn tired of it all. One day, I decided to ask my mother-in-law, Mrs. Amber, may I have a word? How is the construction going at your house? The construction? Oh, it's going smoothly, dear. The other day, Talon asked me to add another $3,000 in additional funding. You'll show me the estimations, won't you? Since you hired the company to renovate your house, they must be giving you estimations on how much it would cost. I don't know much about the money in this enterprise, dear. Mrs. Amber, I've already paid an ungodly amount of money for my house, but I haven't received even a single estimation of the total cost. I need to know what I'm putting myself through if I wish to continue to help you out. My dear Alice, it's only natural for a wife to devote herself entirely to her husband's family, shedding blood and tears if she must. Her savings don't belong to her, but to the whole family. How selfish of you to demand the knowledge of how our money is spent. How it's spent shouldn't concern you. Mrs. Amber, listen to me. What you're saying is complete and utter bullshit. I'm working to make that money, and the money I do make doesn't belong to anyone but me. Talon and I have a joint savings account that we plan to use after we retire. And we occasionally withdraw some from that account because of emergencies. I had no choice but to withdraw some money from that account the last time you asked for funds. Is your house even being renovated at all? The fact you claim it's our money makes me suspicious. I'm afraid I have to refrain from giving you any more until I see the estimations. How could you say such a thing? How dare you even call yourself a wife? Then she left the room in a huff. I felt a complicated mixture of disgust and anxiety at her irresponsibility. I thought I would tell Talon about it when he came home and make sure everything was going to be all right. It was snowing that day, and the night was expected to be unreally cold. I was thinking of making something hot for dinner. I heard my husband come in through the front door. I greeted him, but his face donned an expression of the purest fury I'd ever seen. He threw his bag at me and started yelling.
Hey, Mom called me and said you keep on disobeying her.
I wasn't disobeying her. Perish the thought. Ow! Talon, stop! Enough with the violence! I wrinkled my face in pain when the corner of my husband's heavy bag struck my leg. I told him I had my own reasons, but he wouldn't listen to me. I asked your mother about the renovations, but she brushed it off, saying that they're really working on it. Is there really any construction at all?
So you're claiming we're cheating you out of your money?
I didn't say that. I immediately sensed that I was out of line. Talon got angrier, and I feared for my life. I'm sorry, that was out of line. Just, please, let's calm down and talk about this thoroughly.
You don't know your frickin' place, do you? You're coming with me.
My husband's anger flared up, and he grabbed my arm and started to drag me out onto the veranda. He shoves me outside, and I had to press my hands against the balcony railing to steady myself. The cold was already settling in, and as I turned around, to my horror, Talon closes the door and locks it shut. I was literally trapped outside on an evening cold enough for water droplets to freeze on the metal of the balcony railing where I steadied myself. I panicked and pleaded repeatedly for forgiveness through the window.
Take your stupid brain outside to cool it off. You need to learn a lesson. And that frickin' lesson is to know when you obey your husband and his mother.
I was in a warm room up until that point, so I was lightly dressed. The penetrating cold caused me to shiver. Talon, honey, open the door, please. This is cruel. I'm going to die. I slammed on the balcony door, desperate to open it. My apartment is on the 3rd floor. The snow had begun to fall on the small balcony and was starting to accumulate on the ground. A cold puddle formed under my bare feet. My husband watches me through the balcony door, smiling sinisterly, looking happy and appreciative of the warm room that's banishing the cold. My mother-in-law walked in and was somewhat surprised when she discovered me outside, struggling with the door. Oh, what do we have here?
I'm educating her because she's been disobeying me and my mother, and I will not let this go on.
My mother-in-law nodded her head in satisfaction. Now that's what I call being the head of the family. Mrs. Amber and Talon proceeded to walk out of the room. They ignored my yelling for them to open the door. I didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't call anyone for help. So all I could do was continue banging on the door and screaming as loud as I could. Please, open the door! Please forgive me! I'm freezing! The coldness of the door eventually made my hands feel numb, and the cold air was stinging my throat. I couldn't even speak anymore without enduring some pain. The only sound I could hear was my jaw clattering in the cold, and I couldn't hear anything else anymore. I wonder how much time had passed since then. This just couldn't go on like this. I was going to pass out. If I blackened out like that, I was sure that... What would my husband and mother-in-law say if I died tonight? Would they be sorry? No. Considering how cruel they'd been to me thus far, that was not going to happen for sure. I'm sure they were going to say something like I went out on the balcony on my own and became cold before they knew it. Not on my goddamn watch. First of all, I had to move my body and warm myself up at least a little. And then, I'll let them know who the hell they're dealing with. I looked around the balcony as I jogged in place and I felt myself gradually warm up, although I admit it wasn't much. But just the slight rise in body temperature helped me think more clearly about my options. I hadn't hung the laundry that day, so all I had was the removable metal laundry pole that hung overhead. If I grabbed the aluminum pole directly, I was sure the skin of my hands would stick to it and never come off. But in that moment of desperate survival, I didn't care. I grabbed the pole, lifted it out of its hinges that kept it in place, and held it firmly in my hands. I swing it as hard as I can at the balcony door. I'm gonna smash that stupid door to bits. I heard the sound of glass cracking, and that gave me hope. I kept swinging the metal against the door, and the sound it made every time it struck the glass was deafening. I swung again and again, screaming at the top of my lungs, "Destroy it! Destroy it open!" Is this what an adrenaline rush really is? Or was it really my primal survival instinct that granted me this amazing strength? The glass of the balcony door shattered. Hell yeah! Come on out, Talon, my darling. Let's play rough. I unlocked the door with bloody hands and returned into the corridor that led to our bedrooms. My feet also covered in blood from stepping on the shards of glass. I was so cold and so angry. I felt no pain. There was no response from the room, and I headed for the bedroom where my husband was supposed to be. To the casual onlooker, I would have looked like the perfect antagonist in a horror movie. I went into his bedroom and clutched my rod tighter, ready to beat the shit out of him. The pole was already covered in blood from my hand peeling that indeed stuck to the frozen metal. I had to wrench my hand away, tearing skin off of it as I did, to free my hands of its grasp. To my surprise, however, I found Talon lying in front of his bedroom door. I was stunned, not knowing what was going on, as he had already collapsed before I could beat him. I tried to wake him up by poking his face a few times with the icy pole. But he didn't respond. When I touched him, he felt cold. I came back to myself with a jolt of realization, and I frantically tried to help him. Talon? Talon! Are you okay? It's all right, Talon. Stay with me. I touched my husband's head and discovered a large bump on it. He must have fallen down the steps leading up to a storage room, hit his head and lost consciousness. He was wearing light pajamas and was unconscious, so his body felt cold to the touch. As I was panicking, my mother-in-law came out of the shower. "But what are you doing, Alice?" "Mrs. Amber, Talon is..." "Hey, don't you dare take another step. I'm gonna call the police. Or better yet, I'm calling an ambulance." My mother-in-law looked horrified at the sight of me and went to call the police. That's when my husband groaned.
Ugh.
"Oh, Talon, thank goodness you're okay." Holding the back of his head, which seemed pretty sore, my husband tried to sit up. He winced as he did, and I stooped down to help him. As I did, he looked at me in front of him for the first time, and screamed in sheer terror. My face was swollen with acute frostbite, and my bloodied limbs donned countless shards of sharpened glass. He looked at me as if he had seen a monster, which by this point was pretty much exactly what I was. Only now, in my rational mind, without the survival instincts and the adrenaline rush, did I realize how truly horrifying I may have looked. I didn't know about my face, but my hands, legs, and feet were more than enough to give me a rough idea of how similar I appeared to a deranged psychopath. The sirens of police cars overlap with my husband's screams as he tried to scamper away deeper into the apartment. The police officer who arrived at the scene first was taken aback by the devastation he had caused. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. Hurry up and arrest that woman."
This is the place that reported the incident, I assume.
"Yes, that's right. She beat my darling Talon." "No, I didn't do anything."
We also have reports from your neighbors around the vicinity here, consisting that Miss Alice here was kicked out onto her balcony and started screaming in panic.
Wait, what? I found out that people around the neighborhood had made several calls to the police because of my grief-stricken screams on the veranda, as well as the rampage that followed.
I'm sorry, Alice. Whatever it is that I did, I'm so sorry. Just please leave me in peace and rest well in heaven.
My husband still treated me like I was a spirit from the afterlife, and I remembered what he had done to me. "Don't let me become a Buddha without my permission." Suddenly, my vision started to get blurry, and I collapsed to the ground. I had injuries all over the place, and the loss of blood had apparently been more substantial than I had thought, and I passed out. I was rushed to the hospital by the emergency medical team. I was hospitalized for my injuries and fatigue. The abrasions on my hands and the glass injuries on my feet were worse than I had expected. They said I was left on the balcony for 3 full hours. My life was in real danger, apparently. My husband and mother-in-law were taken in for interrogation by the police. The truth is, the cause of the fight, which was the cost of construction work being done by my mother-in-law's house, was completely pointless, given the fact that they never actually did any renovations at all. I wasn't surprised, though, to be honest. Common knowledge alone should tell me that construction corporations don't ask for that much additional funding multiple times after a general estimation was decided. My husband and mother-in-law had set this up in order to take my savings away from me and make me into a middle-aged wife who would never disobey them. The police interrogated them severely about the fact they had planned to cheat me out of my money and that I was nearly killed as a result of that. They managed to get the police to release them because they assured they meant to let me back in long before I broke back into the apartment, but because Talon had knocked himself out, they couldn't. That was one of the stupidest things I'd ever heard. Talon was knocked out, sure. What could he do? But Mrs. Amber did nothing to, first of all, call an ambulance when her son was unconscious, since she'd been in the shower for close to 90 minutes. Nor did she even think about her daughter-in-law literally fighting for her life out on the balcony. Only when I destroyed the glass door to the balcony and started clambering into the apartment did she notice something was going on, and then discovered me standing over her unconscious son, bloody and furious. That may have been enough for the police to release them on parole for the time being, but my willingness to forgive them was long gone. I filed a claim for divorce, and demanded for compensation that amounted to more than they had cheated me out of, in addition to the alimony of the divorce. My lawyer negotiated with them, and Talon was reasonable and paid up in full. The lawyer said he was very scared of me and was very quiet during the entire negotiation process. I guess the bloody, mutilated image I depicted was a nice touch. After that, my ex-husband and his mother are in debt in order for the alimony and compensation, and they're living in poverty in their dilapidated family home. According to the police, they are fighting all the time, and their relationship is at an all-time low. I decided to resign from my current company and take some time off after the divorce. I'm going to move to a new city altogether and make a fresh start. While I'm on that break, I've also started studying for a few certification exams so that I can make the most of my time off to find a good new job. With every passing day, I approach 30 years of age, but if I work hard, I'm positive my dream will come true.